Hey, Math Moment Makers, we welcome Lisa Marentette onto the podcast today to discuss how to transition from 9 years in the kindergarten classroom environment into a grade 2 position. After so many years in the kindergarten classroom, she wonders what changes she needs to make to structure her math program so it fits the grade 2 classroom environment. And how can she ensure that all students are leaving her class well positioned to tackle the math challenges that lay before them in grade 3?
This is another Math Mentoring Moment episode where we chat with a teacher like you who's working through some problems of practice, and together we brainstorm ways to overcome them. If you've got Math Pebble kicking around in your shoe, head on over to makemathmoments.com/mentor, and in under 2 minutes, you can have a time slot booked to chat about it with us on an upcoming Mentoring Moment episode.
All right, John, let's do this. Welcome to the Making Math Moments That Matter podcast. I'm Kyle Pierce.
And I'm John Mrorr. We are from makemathmoments.com.
This is the only podcast that coaches you through a 6-step plan to grow your mathematics program, whether at the classroom level or at the district level.
And we do that by helping you cultivate and foster your mathematics program like a strong, healthy, and balanced tree. And if you master the 6 parts of an effective math program, the impact of your program will grow and reach far and wide.
Every week, you'll get the insight you need to stop feeling overwhelmed, gain back your confidence, and get back to enjoying the planning and facilitating of your mathematics program for the students or the educators that you serve.
All right, let's dive in here and chat with Lisa about how to transition from her kindergarten days into her grade 2 classroom. Hey there, Lisa. Thanks for joining us on the Making Math Moments That Matter podcast. And I just want to, before Lisa introduces herself, Lisa actually is like kind of my neighbor. She like lives, a couple streets over. She, teaches with my wife. We know Lisa quite well. And actually, and maybe you want to kind of fill us in a little bit about what it's like where you're at right now. But Lisa is staying, and we're recording this in the summer. Lisa is staying at the same cottage that I stayed at last week. So we left, she showed up, and she's on vacation, and she's taken some time to chat with us about her math. Her math story. So Lisa,
hang on here, John. So wait a second. So you're saying that Lisa lives near you, and then you went away for a week, and she couldn't handle it.
That's
you
right.
Being gone for a whole week.
She followed the oars.
Except when she got to the cottage, you were like, "I'm out," and then you went back home, and now she's stuck there.
Should I take that personally?
I personally would. I'm following a pattern here. Lisa, welcome. We have not met, so it's great to meet you. Tell me a little bit about your story, who you are. We know you're coming from John's neighborhood, but where you're teaching and your role in education.
So thanks for having me. It's very nice to meet you in person. Right now, I am leaving my kindergarten post of 9 years, which is a little bittersweet. I loved the time that I spent in kindergarten. I feel like I learned more in that 9 years than I did throughout the span of my career. It was such a good experience. But now it's time to move on and take what I've learned and move it up to grade 2. So I'm really excited about moving to grade 2. It's one of the few primary grades that I haven't taught yet. I started out actually teaching as a second career. I was in banking for 16 years, and just, it wasn't fulfilling, let's say. So I went back to school, and I actually started out 1 year in kindergarten, but before it was the full day program. And then went to grade 3, spent a few years in grade 6, loved grade 6, and then jumped down from 6 to kindergarten, which was a big leap. And I find it's hard to go from older kids to younger kids.
For sure.
So now I feel like I'm moving up. It'll be a little bit easier. I have a better understanding of this stage of development, what it's like to, work with kids that are under the age of 8. So I'm really excited about taking what I've learned so far, bringing it with me to grade 2.
Amazing. Amazing.
That is awesome. And I'm like, must say, my wife taught kindergarten for a handful of years around the time when my oldest was in kindergarten. So, and they teach in a pod at their school. So she was in the pod, not teaching her directly, but she could like see her from afar, and she loved it. And she used to, but she would say it was like very challenging for her, because it was like she was putting everything into the day, but then we got home and she was like, a kindergarten age child is here with me at home. And it was like work followed her home. And when my son came in, he was much more busy, as boys at that age tend to be. My wife's like, I think I'm going to head out into grade 3. I don't know if I can handle having the Lando Bando in that kindergarten space and at home at the same time. So she went back to her post in grade 3. So kind of a similar transition here. Super interested to dig in. But before we do, we always ask every guest on the podcast to share that moment that they remember from their own math learning journey. What is that math moment for you when we say math class or mathematics that pops into your mind?
Well, you know what? I will be perfectly honest. For a very, very long time, the words math class would sort of make my stomach turn. And honestly, it was not my happy place for a really long time. When I was younger and grades 1 probably through 5, I loved it. It made sense. I was keeping up. I did well in school, and it wasn't a huge challenge. And then something happened, grade 6, grade 7 especially. And the one moment, here we are 35 years later.
Still remember.
I still remember, 40 years, honestly, was asking for some help from my grade 7 teacher, and him being so frustrated with me and just saying, I don't understand why you don't get this. You're so good in everything else. Why don't you get this? And I was like, that did it for me. That just shattered my confidence.
For sure.
I thought, well, there must be something wrong with me. If you can't figure out why I'm not getting this, then there's just something wrong with me, and I'm not meant to know this.
Wow, my gosh.
That, really turned things for me. I still continued to do okay in school and everything else, but I decided at that point, math isn't for me. I'll be a language person. And I said, well, loved language. But that was it. My confidence was shattered, and I just assumed I was never going to be good at it.
Wow. Yeah.
So,
that's so bad.
That I'm sure, obviously this that has stuck with you. You're remembering it after these years, and I think anyone would. I think anyone would remember that moment that kind of shatters your confidence in something you enjoyed before that moment. Now, Lisa, like you eventually, like, you went into finance still after that. And I'm curious, not maybe, I guess, about that story, but more about like, how do you feel, or maybe you've consciously thought about this, or maybe not consciously thought about, like, how that moment has affected you as a teacher, and thinking about, like, what, did it affect your teaching style, things you think about in the classroom when working with students? Do you think, or maybe could you comment on that, and thinking about how that moment has kind of changed you or helped you become a teacher you are now?
Well, luckily, so there was I didn't go to teachers college out of university.
Right.
I spent some time in banking, and obviously had to use some math, right? I worked in like commercial mortgages, and this is, oh gosh, aging myself, but there were a lot of calculations that we still had to do manually. And as long as somebody told me, here's the formula, use this
Right.
is what it's going to tell you, I was fine. I can follow directions, no problem. And I feel like up until that point, when I look back on it as a teacher, I think that's why I was okay getting through school until things got complicated and there were too many directions to remember. If I couldn't just memorize the list of directions to get the right answer, if I made a mistake and lost myself, then that's where the wheels fell off for me, because I didn't have like a conceptual understanding of math at that time. And so later in life, if someone just gave me the directions, told me what to do, I was fine.
Mhm.
So as a teacher, once I went to teachers college, thankfully I had a great math teacher, who I think identified me as someone with math anxiety as soon as I walked in the door, because he would look right at me and say, "You can do this. This is okay. Here's how you're going to make it work for kids so that they understand."
Mhm.
So I think it was important for me to learn where kids are at and understand what they're coming into the classroom, what kind of baggage they have around math, which I could connect to and let them know it doesn't always have to be this way, right? I went through this and I hated it and I was really frustrated, but then I worked through it and I figured out how to do it and be confident and actually enjoy it. So I think it was something that's really important to me to bring into the classroom and let kids know it's okay not to like it. You don't have to like it, but you can still be confident and know that you can do it regardless.
I love it. I love it. And I've said it before, and I'll continue to say it. It's not about every student loving it. It's not about every student wanting to become a mathematician, right? It's about knowing that you can do it if
Yeah.
you choose to continue to pursue it, right? And that to me is like the greatest success. It's like, hey, listen, I can do it. I always say it about history class. Like, I knew I could do history. I just didn't really want to. And that's okay, right? But we don't want a student who's feeling like, I can't do it. And your math moment really highlights, I think, an experience that a lot of people have. Like, I'm going to say the majority of people have at some point in their journey. It just happens at a different place. So for you, it was that 6 to 7 year, right? That's where, you sort of got kicked off the bus, right? You fell off the wagon. For me, it was in university. After first year university, I went into second year university. I was doing a math program. And up to that point, I was doing exactly what you have recognized you were doing, which was probably just mimicking and following procedures. And I was just lucky enough to be able to follow more procedures than maybe you were able to do, right? Based on maybe your short-term memory or long-term memory, or however you were memorizing it. For me, it was like second year university is where it was like I hit the end of the line. And to me, it comes down to, and you nailed it, this conceptual understanding thing, which it's so easy to discount it when it's not needed.
Yeah.
But when it's needed, it's too late. And this is the part that I think is so key when, people talk about the whole new math thing, or, in the States, Common Core, whatever it is. Conceptual understanding is something that you need to have it. You need to prepare yourself so that when it does get difficult, that you have that conceptual foundation to land on, and to, be able to kind of look around and go, okay, I know where I'm at. I can back up a step or two and go, all right, move forward. But when you get too far down the line, and for you in grades 6 and 7, you were probably a few years down the line conceptually, or procedurally, I guess, relative to your conceptual understanding. And there was a mismatch, and you're going, oh my gosh, what do I do now? I don't understand any of this. And then panic mode ensues. And the piece that I think is really sad is that up until that point, you had a belief that you were a math person, like you were saying, like as a student. I think we all are those people. Like every single student felt at one point in their life that they were good at math, right? Like whether it was kindergarten, whether it's grade 1, 2, whatever that is, they feel like they're good at math. And then at some point, they just suddenly, it's gone. It's like the carpet is just ripped from under them. And it's like, they're like, maybe it was all a lie. Right.
Right.
And like that belief, it was like, it was never true, but in reality, it was true. Right.
Well, Lisa, how many of your kindergartners like don't have that, like, hey, I'm bad at, like, maybe there are. And I feel like some of them, and there's probably, it's told it's okay to be bad at math already. But I mean, like, how many kindergartners, for the last 9 years, you've been seeing kindergartners every day for, all that time. How many are kind of enjoying math and not saying like, oh, it's math, like it doesn't happen that early.
No. And that's what I loved about kindergarten. They're not jaded yet. They
Yeah.
are open to anything. And honestly, sometimes they don't even realize that it is math, right? Because we incorporated
Right.
games and activities, and they just think they're playing with numbers and that it's fun. And so, it's not until sometimes towards the end of SK when they start to become a little more self-aware and they notice when other kids are doing more than they are. Because we can differentiate, right? Like we do things in small groups and we get to know our kids one-on-one. And so some kids might be ready for moving on to, composing and decomposing numbers using base 10. And some kids are still working on one-to-one correspondence and they notice that. And sometimes you'll see the odd kid who's like, oh, I don't want to do this.
Right.
And we still have that option in kindergarten to like we make them try it and sit with us for a bit. But once they get frustrated and want to walk away, then they do. And those are the kids that I think we always, you come back around again and try and introduce it in a different way to make sure that you don't lose them so that that confidence isn't shattered and they have a chance to be successful.
Right. Right. So
sure.
what would you say is your, what's a pebble right now in your shoe? You're leaving kindergarten after 9 years, moving to grade 2. It's summer at the time of this, this recording. We're kind of thinking about next year. You're thinking about getting into the classroom. What's on your mind? Like, fill us in on some of the things you're thinking about, wonders you're having, things that we can kind of hash together on here so that that you feel like you're going to start the year off on a great note.
Well, I think for me, the biggest challenge is going from having two educators in the room to one, because I don't know. It's just obviously logistically, it's easier to hit every kid and have a really good understanding of where everyone is and what everyone needs when there's two of you in the room. But just the format of lesson planning is going to be different, right? We would integrate math into pretty much anything they were doing, where now it's a more structured day. I want to make sure that I'm still able to have kids engaged in hands-on things and working in small groups.
Right.
But I'm not sure what does a math block look like in grade 2? I mean, I know what it looked like in grade 6 because that I loved that, but I don't know what is it going to look like in grade 2.
Well, it's interesting, you bring up some key pieces. One that I think is maybe more important than we sometimes recognize initially, but going from two educators to one, just always having that person to not only like when it comes to differentiating and maybe even classroom management and those things, but even just to have that, that other person to have a conversation with, right?
Yeah.
Like when something's happening, it's like, so-and-so did this, and I'm not exactly sure like what my move should be. And that other person to just have an idea to go, hey, why not try blank? Or you walk up to that student who was struggling and, you're saying like, I'm not sure how to help them approach it in a different way. And they've sort of like become unproductive in this, conversation. The other educator can kind of go in there and maybe try a different angle. So that's a big one. But when it comes to this math block, the one thought that I have, and it's a wonder for you, is that what I feel a lot of, especially grade 1 and 2 educators are being asked to do more of, is more of what you're good at in kindergarten. And you're kind of coming at it thinking like, how do I be more like them? Like, how do I make it look more like what they're doing? Right. And now I'm wondering, in terms of like, what in your mind is really, let's say, I don't want to say holding you back, but what are you really concerned about here? Is it that you're like, I'm going to do it wrong, or like I've got to fit a different mold? But let's dig a little bit deeper here, because I think in a perfect world, in a grade 2 classroom, educators, administrators, maybe the math consultant in your district might be like, it would be amazing if you can make your grade 2 class operate more like a kindergarten class. So I'm wondering, what's really concerning you right now in regards to this idea of like what a math block could or should look like?
Well, it's funny that you say that because when I did my kindergarten specialist, they always talked about how in a perfect world, K to 2 would look very similar, right?
Mm-hmm.
In all aspects of the program, but particularly in math. I think it's the logistics of it. I know how to
Mm-hmm.
do it when I'm in a room, and even when we had 30 kids, they know how to engage in activities on their own, and I could be selective and find kids who are working on something that maybe I can add to, and then I just bring myself over and get involved, right?
Right.
It's a less structured type of day, whereas I feel like, and we had 2 years. That was the other thing.
Mm-hmm.
So you know
Mm-hmm.
what, if this 3-year-old who came in and didn't turn 4 to the end of December wasn't ready for counting or wasn't interested
Right.
whatsoever, it was okay. We would leave him alone, let him do something else until he is ready. But I feel like there's more of a time crunch and there's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of expectations. I was just going through the new curriculum this week and I was like, oh, okay, well, this is a lot to fit in.
Totally.
How do I make sure that I'm not missing out on anything so that these kids don't leave grade 2 missing some fundamental building blocks, right? I
Mm-hmm.
guess because I feel like there's some pressure on me because I want to do the best for them. I don't
Of
want
course. Of
anyone
course.
to leave grade 2 without everything that they need to be successful. And like you said, if I could do it using what I've learned from kindergarten, that would be ideal. It's just logistically, how will I fit it all in and make sure that I don't miss out on anything?
Got it. Got
That's
it.
my beef.
Mm-hmm.
And I think your beef is everybody's beef in almost every every grade. It's that question of like, how do I prepare best for the next level? And I
Yeah.
think we ask that, and then we immediately turn to the time issue. It's like, I got to get all that in so that they're ready to
Yeah.
go to the next
And
level.
I
I
don't
got
want
to
to
get
miss a
them
thing.
ready. Right. And I want to make sure
Yeah.
I'm doing everything that I want to structure my classroom like the next level's going to structure their classroom so that they're ready for that grade level. And in what we've found from talking with so many educators at various grades is everybody has that wonder and that worry, or it's in the back of their mind, worry anyway, and it trickles up and then it trickles back down. So it's like the grade 4 teacher is thinking about grade 5, the grade 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All of a sudden you've got grade 12 teachers thinking about university, and we're all thinking that way. And it's like everyone's just thinking about getting them ready for the next level instead of thinking about what can I do to help prepare this kid for
Yeah.
where they are now and progress them forward. And because if we have that thinking about getting them ready for the next grade, as I said, it's going to trickle up, and it's like we're just constantly thinking about that thing. And that's where this rush to the algorithms come in. That's rush to like, let's just get memorizing happening because that's the fastest way we can build this in so that they're ready for the next grade. And like, that's what they're doing at high school anyway. So we're all going to be trying to push these kids at high school, and high school teachers are like, I just wish I had better problem solvers. Why didn't those grade 8 teachers help them with better problem solving and being more resilient?
It all
And it's
started in grade 2 with Lisa.
it's a mishmash of like everyone thinking they're getting ready for the next grade, but what we need to do is actually, think about how do we build that conceptual understanding and problem solving and getting kids to actually experience problems. Like those are really the key things. And if we can do that, for the kid that we're working with or the kids that we're working with that year and think about that, then they'll be ready when they get there. They'll be that confident. We just got off the phone, Lisa, with we had another interview this morning, and he had that same wonder. Is like he wanted them to. He was 8th grade, getting them ready to get into high school and take, say, he was an American teacher, so into algebra 1. And he had that same thought. It's like, how do I help them think about and go that route? And we just talked about how do we build kids' confidence? How can we build kids' confidence so that when they get there, they're confident that they can continue on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that those are some of the things. So let me kind of bring this back to something that I can ask you is like, if if you could think about grade 2 in general, and like what would you want, say, your kid, think about your kid goes on to the next year, or a kid goes on to the next year, and the next year after that, like it's a few years in a row.
Mhm.
And they were like, hey, I remember being in Miss Marentette's class. And I remember that the best part or the most important thing I pulled from that class was blank, blank, and blank. Like, what would they say? What would you want them to say so that they were prepared, to go on?
I would want them to remember that they worked on problems together with other kids and that they were comfortable talking about math, not just sitting and doing a worksheet. I want them to feel like they actually could solve problems and apply what they learned in a meaningful way. That was, I think that's one of the things that's still stands out for me from my grade 6 experience, that kids really enjoyed, and I think they got a lot out of it, is sitting around a great big, sheet of paper and talking to other kids and trying different strategies and then sharing what they did afterwards, right? Like those were the moments where they learned the most. And I recognize, especially being in French immersion, that that communication piece is a little bit more of a challenge as you come down in the grades. In grade 6, they're
Sure.
fairly fluent and they're okay with it. It does add an extra layer in grade 2 when you're reminding them all the time that they have to, we want you to talk about your math, but then you also have to do it in French, right? It's
Mm.
asking, I feel like it's asking an awful lot of a 7 and 8-year-old, but that's what we signed up for, right? So that's the
Mhm.
program, and then we have to work within those parameters. So, but I would like for them to remember actually doing math and not just and talking about it and sharing and applying what they learned in a meaningful way so that
Right.
they understand, what, this isn't just a subject in school.
Hmm.
You'll use this in life, and you'll be glad that you can do it.
I love those, those takeaways, those, things I remember from Miss Marentette's class, right? And students, one thing you didn't say, which, I was shocked you didn't say it, but saying like, why don't you understand this as the memory didn't come up. So, that of course I was not anticipating you saying, but these are all very productive things for students to think about. And I want to go all the way back to your kindergarten experience that you've had. And it's like everything comes down to balance. And that will be, I think, if there's one word that I hope you take away from this experience or this conversation, is the idea of how do I balance to bring maybe some of the things that you might envision a grade 2 classroom having, right? Because that's sort of like one of the maybe the worries that you had, or one of your concerns. The pebble in your shoe is like, how do I do what grade 2 teachers do? How do I structure that? And it's like, I don't want you to go too far that way, because again, we're trying to pull them more towards where you are in kindergarten. But then also, how do I build in my kindergarten experience? But again, with balance, we don't have the 2 years to sort of, come back and so forth. So it's really going to come down to balance. And I think for you to try to decide on, and you can decide how many buckets you want. But if you were to look at those, I'll call them standards. A lot of our friends are American who listen, but expectations, and you were to go through, and we'll talk math specifically, that, if you had just 2 buckets, you could decide if you want 3 buckets or 4 buckets. But if there's 2 buckets, to keep it super simple, of like really fundamental, like really important,
Yeah.
and maybe not so important. Or like if you were comparing, you took 2 standards at a time and you're like, which one is more important? Yeah, that one goes in the fundamental bucket. This one, put it back on the table. Then you pick up 2 more. You go, which one of these 2 is in the fundamental bucket, right? I put it in the fundamental bucket, and start to get yourself to a place where you go, okay, there are like some non-negotiables, because I think what we tend to do is we go one way or the other. We're like, we force feed students that like every expectation, you're gonna understand it now, when in a kindergarten class on the other end of the perspective or spectrum, you have some students that are like, they're not ready and they're not being productive. So you were like, we're going to let them go. We have less time to let them go in grade 2, but we still need to let them go on some things. Right. So again, coming back to this place of balance, it's like we don't want to force feed, but we also don't want to let it slip where it's just sort of like falls off the radar. But there's certain expectations that I might be like, you know what, I'm not too concerned about that one because that one's not going to actually impact or influence their confidence, their resilience, their perseverance, their seeing themselves as mathematicians. It's also not going to hurt them when they go into Mr. Johnson's class next year in grade 3. But you know what will hurt them is if they're like not very fluent and flexible with their number sense, and operations and, those types of things. So how do we, if we could start thinking about what really matters, that can also help you determine like which part of my math block should be more structured, meaning we got to do this, like we got to do this. And then which part of my math block can be a little more flexible, right? And it's like, this can slide a little bit. I'm not too concerned about that. And then how do I also maintain balance when it comes to some of the things you discuss, which I think are really key? Having kids collaborating, collaboratively problem solving, having them, having mathematical discourse about them, about mathematics. They're talking, they're discussing, they're working together, not just sitting and doing a worksheet. But I wanted to highlight that one because it's like sometimes we translate it into never doing a worksheet. Right. And there is time where students do need to, even in grade 2, to think independently. And it's like, I started doing the collaborative, approach to math and was like, everything was collaborative. Yeah. And I realized after I'm like, oh, like that might not have been the best move that everything was collaborative. I can give them a collaborative experience, but then I should also make sure that I'm addressing some of that independent think time, some of that purposeful practice time, some of that time for them to actually, work through a problem. Because as we know in collaborative situations, there are some who take the lead and there are some who take more of a back seat. And sometimes they make it look like they're driving the car, but they're not really driving the car. Right. And so again, this balance idea, it's like, what part of my class can be less structured? What part of my class do I want to make sure there is at least enough structure so I know that they're getting that fundamental, fact or piece? And I think some of that hard work is going to be, it will be an experiment for you in this first year, of course, but ahead of time, if you were to even just, like I said, have like maybe 2 buckets and kind of start sorting and sifting through, and you can change your mind, right? That's the beauty, right? Like, it's like, you know what, this one actually is more important than I thought. I'm going to put it back over here. Or I thought this was important, and maybe it's not that important. I can put it back over here. But at least getting yourself really thinking about those things. And then that way it will eliminate the overwhelm. Because I think when we look at the curriculum, we look and think all important. When I think in reality, there's not, like, I would say like, 50% maybe is important, maybe not even, right? In terms of like fundamental, gotta make sure that, we've done it right.
Something I think that can be, I guess, less overwhelming is when you think about what those buckets can be, is when you think about your strands and you have your overall expectations listed underneath those strands. You're actually only required to report on the overall expectations. So usually these overall expectations are general, kind of like what Kyle's saying. It's like, being it doesn't say being flexible and fluent with number sense, but it's like you'll look at those overall expectations and go, okay, these are really the big ideas from the course. Yes, they list specific expectations underneath, which are things that we think we have to like cover in detail. Did I hit every single one of these? But actually we're only required to report on the overalls. So it can be kind of a little bit more freeing to go, how did I help move my students along this progression on the overalls? These things underneath help me do that. But hey, the whole goal is for me to get a student from here to here, or through, take them wherever they are on this progression and move them along. because, you know, those strands are going to be the same in grade 3, and it happens iteratively over the course of time for the student to kind of progress. But I think the overalls can be a little bit more freeing to go like, these are the really important things.
That's really helpful. And I really like the idea of the 2 buckets. That relieves a little bit of anxiety when you know, like everybody comes into the job, they want to do the best that they can. But you're right, it is super overwhelming when you go through that 25 pages of expectations and think, how on earth? So being able to say, this is what we're going to focus on, and then those specifics might help us get there. I like that. I like that perspective. I think I'm going to try that.
Yeah, and I think, you know, thinking about this, what Kyle kind of said is about like one thing that we tend to rely heavily on is that conceptual understanding so that you can build procedural fluency. And I think many teachers think, especially when we have that trickle up, hey, got to get them ready, I have to get them to be doing those abstract, we call them naked problems, where we, you know, give them a bunch of problems on, say, you know, adding, multiplying, or dividing, and we need to crunch them into being able to do these algorithms before they get to the next grade level, instead of thinking about what strategies and models can I help, you know, my students with, so that they have a more robust skill set when they get to that next grade level. And I know that, you know, for me, you know, figuring out fluency from Jennifer Bay Williams has been a great resource to kind of help thinking about some of those models that help give you flexible strategies to use with those models. Kyle, the other book that you've heavily relied on, which is I think Teaching Mathematics.
Yeah, teaching
conceptually.
Teaching elementary and middle school mathematics developmental, or teaching developmentally is what it's called.
Teaching developmental. You got it.
That's a John Vanderwall book, which actually Jennifer Bay Williams was one of the
she was a co-author
on
that's
that.
Exactly right.
And it has been updated, I want to say like 7 or 8 times. And there's a lot of like nuggets in there to just get you thinking about, and you could look at something as simple as addition, and just to give you some ideas on different models and the strategies and like what's going on, the structures. They use the word structure quite a bit, of how different like addition or subtraction problems are structured. And the reality is, you know, I read through this book and go, wow, I have a math degree and I did not realize that there were, you know, different structures of addition problems or subtraction problems. But when you look at them, you go, wow, this could be really helpful, but also it allows you to be very intentional as well, so that we don't rely on, what we tend to do is we tend to rely on the same structures. So takeaway, for example, for subtraction is what most people were told when they were kids. It's like takeaway is subtraction. And it's like, it is one of the structures of subtraction. It is one of the types of subtraction, but there's also the difference, which is like contextually different, you know, like the difference between 2 numbers is not takeaway. Like you can use takeaway as a strategy, but that's not really what you're doing. You're like finding the distance between 2 numbers. You're not taking anything away. So like imagine to that student, I'm picturing you as a student who was in grade 6 and 7, and that teacher probably wasn't subtraction, but imagine if that teacher's telling you to take away, but the question's really a difference problem, and you're going, I don't get it. And they're like, what don't you get? And you're like, because it doesn't make sense what you're saying. And the teacher's like, has no idea what you're talking about, right? So this is happening all the time in math class. So that's a great book that can arm you not to like necessarily become the master before the end of summer so you're ready to go, but it's like one of those things that you just little bits at a time, you know, like you just focus on a little bit at a time, and that will help you to feel more confident. And you will go down some rabbit holes, which, you know, will get you thinking differently. And it just, I just find that the more we focus on as educators on that conceptual piece, which you had already highlighted, the better we become in that, the better we can be in the moment for those students, right? So when that student is struggling with a concept and they get, you know, the productive struggle has stopped, right? You were talking about that kindergarten student who's kind of like, I'm all done. sometimes the missing piece is for me to be flexible enough to be able to have that other strategy, right? Or to have the model to use. It's like I came with my 10 frame, and it's like the 10 frame doesn't seem to be working for him. And it's like, if that's all I got in the tank, then that's all I got. Like, I can't help you any other way. So these are things that, we can do as educators over time to build our conceptual understanding as we go, but it is an as we go process. And we don't certainly want to become overwhelmed or overburdened with that, that piece as well. So that's definitely a good little read for you. So my wonder is here, as we start wrapping things up, where is your head at? And I would say, like, what do you think is, your next step? It is July 24th as we record this here in Ontario. We start after Labor Day weekend, beginning of September. What do you think? Like, we talked about a lot of ideas, not that you do them all right away. What would you say is your immediate next step to help you kind of get your head to the next place in this journey so you can feel like you're going to hit the ground running here in September?
I think the first thing that I will do is pull out the expectations and start my 2 buckets. And, just give myself a little bit of focus and maybe a loose framework of what I want to cover over the year, but really just focus on the first 2 months, like which ones in that bucket are going to be the priority, which ones maybe are easy wins for kids to build a little bit of confidence at the beginning of the year.
Love it.
I think that's where I'll start off with. I'm not going to overwhelm myself with planning in detail the entire year. Loose framework of what are the priorities for the year, and focus on the first 2 months, build some confidence, and then obviously I'm going to pick up that book, start reading some.
We'll drop it off. We have it here.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I've got an extra copy here kicking around that we'd be happy to
I'm on my way out to Rondo tonight.
Oh, hey, I've got a bag of stuff that I forgot at my house that you can pick up.
There you go.
That's a great I think immediate next step. And I think one more thought that I feel like could and I think you probably know this one already, is to think about how to keep your grade 2 class structurally like a kindergarten class. We're constantly trying to think about how to teach our high school classes that way, and present problems and get kids engaged in problems and play with math, so that we can consolidate and tie bows at the end and present the strategies and the models then. I think keeping that in mind as you go into kind of the structure part of like what your class looks like, how can you kind of engage kids in playing with the mathematics that you want to bring about at the end of the lesson or the middle of the lesson. I think that can be a kind of a good kind of framework as well to think about structuring that class.
Yep, that is definitely the plan. I mean, that's what I loved about kindergarten, and I always believed that this needs to go beyond kindergarten. There's so many kids who could benefit from it, all the way through grade 2 and probably beyond, but I don't want them to lose out because they left the kindergarten classroom.
Yeah, no, I love it. That's great. And yeah, I would, definitely it would be a shame if, let's say, you're trying to make it look like a traditional grade 2 class, because you got a lot of great things going on. And I would say, again, that focus on balance. I love your next step. I think that's going to really help you get your head focused on more that matters, and just eliminate maybe some of the overwhelm for your next steps. I'm wondering, Lisa, is it all right if maybe, after next school year, if we were to maybe have another conversation? Maybe it's next summer, I don't know, but would you be open to letting us know how things went, and what worked well, what surprised you? There's going to be many of those, and maybe chat about some next steps at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to do that.
Awesome.
I would love to, for sure.
Awesome. Thanks. We'll obviously be keeping in contact as we normally do, but thanks, Lisa, so much for joining us on this episode, and go enjoy that cottage.
I will. I'm just watching the birds out on the lake, and I think it's time to get a kayak out there.
There you
Beautiful.
go.
Beautiful. Thanks so much.
Awesome.
All
Take
right.
care, my
Thanks for
friend.
having
Nice to meet you.
me. Take care.
All right there, folks. We hope you enjoyed that conversation. And what I love about Lisa, obviously, being a great friend of mine.
Yeah, I was just going to say,
a neighbor.
Love that she's your neighbor. That's what it is.
She's taking time out of her summer to think about her, her coming year. I think we all do that when we're, teachers. Think about think about that kind of programming. It's always in the back of our mind when we're thinking that way. But she's obviously very reflective. And when I think about our 6 parts of our classroom tree, in this particular episode, we talked about probably all parts indirectly, but specifically the tree that, the part of the tree that kind of stands out most to me right now are the branches of the tree, which are her pedagogical moves. She's thinking about what does it structurally look like in the classroom. She's coming from a play-based kindergarten classroom, and she's thinking about what are my moves to take, that and emulate that in my grade 2 classroom. And I think she was really looking for some permission to kind of like continue that in that grade 2 classroom and go like, hey, do I have to structure it this way? Or how do I make that balanced approach? She's thinking about what those teacher moves are to emulate and keep that learning going. And Kyle, I think the other part of the tree that we kind of brought into this conversation was the roots of the tree, this content knowledge, and knowing your curriculum deep enough to be able to point and notice and name the things so that you can say, hey, what's the most important here? What of these ideas all across, we got all these standards to cover this year. Well, what's the most important? And I think knowing our curriculum at that conceptual level helps us pick out those really important topics to cover and streamline. So after this conversation, I think Lisa is on her way to kind of thinking about, giving herself permission to structure a classroom the way she wants to structure it, but also I think it gave her, she felt less overwhelmed with like all the stuff she needs to cover to get ready for grade 3, get those students ready for the grade 3 classroom, and going, I really only need to focus on these really big ideas, and I think everything's gonna be okay.
I love it. I definitely agree with you. The branches, the roots, the part that, might go under the radar a little bit here is how strong the limbs of her tree are. And that is her own personal professional development planning, right? Like she's been thinking about these things and she's been looking for ways that she can build upon, how does she strengthen the branches? How does she strengthen the roots? And now she's been pointed to a couple of resources, and she's ultimately going to do a little bit more self-directed learning.
True.
And that is going to be so helpful for her as she enters into this new part of her journey. So I'm super curious to check in with her at the end of this school year to see how things went. I'm sure she's going to learn a ton. She's going to fall and hopefully pick herself back up, dust herself off, learn from the experience. And I bet by this time next year, when she's entering into her second year in grade 2, I'm sure she's going to now have all these new revelations, all these new ideas, and things that she thought would be true that weren't true, and vice versa. So really excited to dig in there. So friends, what was your big takeaway? As we've mentioned before, ratings and reviews are so critical to helping to keep a podcast moving forward. Hey, we are in the top 0.5% of podcasts in the world, which is fantastic. It's amazing. That means we have tons and tons of people listening and tuning in from all over the world. But one thing that we don't have a massive amount of are those ratings and reviews. And we really want to make sure that we can help more educators so we can help more students. We have a goal to reach 1 million students, to help them look at math more productively, to give them that productive disposition, the math content knowledge and understanding, the conceptual understanding that we all wish we had when we were going through school. So do us that solid. Open up that app. Hit your rating. It could be whatever rating you choose, whatever you think is fair, and leave us a 1 to 3 sentence review. And that's going to tell the podcast gods out there to share it with more people so that we can build this Math Moment Maker community.
Hey, folks, this was a Mentoring Moment episode, and we'd love for you to be our next Mentoring Moment guest. All you have to do is head on over to makemathmoments.com/mentor. That's makemathmoments.com/mentor. We've got a button there for you to click and pick a slot, pick a time slot, chat with us about a current pebble that's rattling around in your shoe, and then we'll kind of figure that out together, and then hopefully at the end of that call that you'll be feeling refreshed. You'll be feeling less overwhelmed, kind of like Lisa did here today, so that you can go to the classroom and rock it. So head on over to makemathmoments.com/mentor. We want to chat with you.
Awesome. Show notes, links to resources, and transcripts, all available over at makemathmoments.com/episode 250. That is makemathmoments.com/episode 250. Until next time, my friends, I am Kyle Pierce.
And I'm John Orr.
High fives for us.
And a high five for you.